Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Journey to Tech with Credge. Today I will be telling you about what I did after that devastating exam failure. So, are you ready? Let's get straight into it. I felt dejected. I felt like I wanted to quit. And in private, I verbally said to myself, I quit. I don't want to do this anymore. But then something I realized about myself. The moment I say I quit, there's this inner voice in me that says, nope, you are not quitting. You are going to try again. And I said, I quit. I don't want to do this. That inner voice said to me, nope, you are going to try again. And therefore, the more I heard that voice, I said, it is time to try again. So I decided to take a step back and do a post-mortem and say, what could I have done differently? When I thought about the exam, I realized that there were some questions that I was not adequately prepared for. So therefore, I said to myself, I need to focus more on those topics so that I can get those covered and understand them very well. Additionally, I realized that the practice exam that they provided was not sufficient. So I needed more practice questions so that I can know my weaknesses early. So I did some more digging and I found a course on Udemy that happened to have 6 practice questions under exam conditions that I could go through. That was a big game changer for me because practice exams help you to focus on your weak areas, because when you fail at certain questions, you are able to now go back and say, how can I do these better? Additionally, I spoke to a colleague of mine and I was able to get a practice question as well. And so, off I was, studying after work on weekends. It was not easy. There were times when I did the practice exam and I failed it by 10 percentage points. Another time, I failed it and I got a magnificent 34%. Wow, that was a new failure record for me. But guess what? The good thing about it was that this wasn't the real thing. I now could go back to the questions and see where I went wrong. And therefore, once I saw that, I was able to go back to the material and cover it yet again. But boy, it wasn't easy. Sometimes it got so overwhelming. Tiredness creeped in, hunger creeped in, frustration creeped in when you failed those questions. As a matter of fact, I'm going to play a little video right now to show some of the emotions that I was going through. Let me tell you this, I had to stop the exam a while ago because time after, or rather question after question I'm getting wrong. I'm struggling here right now, man. The exam is in a few days. How am I going to manage? Oh God, man. Can't bother, you know. Oh, Jesus. See how much notes I have to take? Oh, man. So much notes I have to take, man. Oh, gosh. So much notes I have to take. How am I going to retain all of this? My exam receipt was scheduled to start at 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday. But from 6 p.m., man, the nerves started kicking in, the butterflies started jumping up and down in my stomach. I was nervous. I was wondering if anything I studied would be sufficient for me to pass the exam this time. I knew so much was at stake. For one, if I failed this, I wouldn't get the certification. And two, If I failed it, I would now have to find another $245 to resit it. And I said, I do not have the money. I need to pass. So, at around 6:15, I decided to stop all studying and I prayed. I asked the Lord to help me to pass and help Him to calm my nerves. Help me to calm my nerves. I also called my mother and I made sure I asked her to pray for me as well. And she did pray and she encouraged me and she says, don't worry about a thing, son. Just go and do your best. So the minutes ran off and sooner or later it was 7:15 p.m. I had to check in and sign in to make sure that I was on time to start the exam. Once that was out of the way, I now navigated to the page to start the test. I read the instructions carefully and I said another quick prayer. And then I hesitantly clicked the Start Test button. The first question came up. I read it carefully, I read it again, and I read it again. And I realized that I knew the answer, so I checked it. Then on to question 2. I read it again, I read it again, and I realized I knew the answer to this one. Said, okay, not bad so far. I checked the correct answer. Then questions 3, 4, 5, 6. I made sure I read it again, and I read it again, just to make sure that I'm not tricked by the wording. And I made sure I read the responses carefully, so that I am not tricked by any off word that could cause me to select the wrong answer. But the answers, I knew them, and I checked them. There are several others that came after, and I knew the answer. And I confidently checked those as well. And then I started to say to myself, this is a much better experience so far. But then I had to caution myself, said, look, the exam is not over as yet. You have many questions to go. Do not be complacent. So I moved on to the next question. At around question 15, I realized that there was a question that stumped me. I was like, oh no, not again. I read the question once, I read it again, and I read it again. And I selected the best answer that I could, but I made sure that this time I checked it to review it later. I looked on the clock, and it seemed like the time was going fast. So what I did, for those that I confidently knew, I checked it. For those that I was not so sure about, I ensured that I checked the option to review later. Because what I wanted to do was ensure that I got to the end of the test so that I had sufficient time to review. I booked up on about 2 or 3 more questions that stumped me. So I selected an answer and I checked the option to review later. But guess what? Some questions after that, I was able to confidently answer yet again. But I made sure I read the question carefully, I read it again, and yes, you guessed it, I read it again, because I wanted to ensure that I'm not tricked by the wording of the question and the answers. So I went through and my spirit started to feel lifted. I felt deep down in my heart that yes, I'm going to pass this exam. But then, a few more questions later, I booked up on a few more that stumped me. And I said, okay, let me do the best that I could. And then the nerves started to act up and the nerves started kicking up rumpus. And I was saying to myself, Lord, please help me. And I said to myself, calm down. You got this. Just answer to the best of your ability and then check over. And I did that. I looked and I saw that I was running out of time. Or so I thought. Because it seemed like the time was running off pretty quickly. But then when I got to the end of the exam itself, the last question that is, I realized that I had about 35 minutes left over, and I was like, yes, this is good. So I used that remaining time to check my answers. I did not submit the exam at that time. So I went through and I looked at those that I struggled with. I read the question once, I read it again, I read it again, and guess what? I read it again, just to make sure that I understood what was asked. So, some questions I left alone because I simply did not know the answer. But some of them, after reviewing it, I was able to change my answer because based on what the question is asking, the answer I initially selected didn't seem to fit. Additionally, there was one or two that I was comfortable with and I confidently answered, but I selected them to review just in case. When I read the question again, I realized that the answer that I have selected first was possibly not the correct answer, so I was able to change those. Then it came down to 15 minutes and I had a few more questions to review. So I made sure that I checked these questions. I read the question once, I read it again, I read it again, and you guessed it, I read it again. Because I said to myself, I need to get this certification now. Then came the final 60 seconds. Oh my gosh, the nerves were on fire again. I still checked through. I was able to only check 2 more questions. But I went through and I said, okay, this possibly is the best answer. And I checked the other one and I said, this is possibly the best answer. Then 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds remained. My heart was beating very fast. Then 4, 3, 2, 1. The exam was over. I got to the page that said I have to submit the exam now because the time had expired. I said another prayer in my mind. I said, Lord, please let me pass this exam. And nervously, I selected Submit Test. I clicked on it and my screen was spinning for 5 seconds, what seemed like 5 minutes. Then the page came up, and when I saw the results, I was elated. I finally passed the exam. Look at this video to show how I reacted when I passed the exam. Yes. Oh God, I finally passed. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Whew. Oh gosh. What did I learn from this experience? I learned that I'm not a quitter. Even if there are times I feel like I'm ready to give up, there's always that inner voice that says, try again, get up, go again. And because of this, I want to encourage you. Anytime you experience a failure, don't let it get you down. Don't let it continue to discourage you. You may feel devastated at first, but once you take those small steps of getting back up and learning from your failures and continuing to improve, you will eventually get to that place of success. I guarantee it. It doesn't matter if you failed twice, 3 times, 4 times, 7 times. What matters is that you get up after each fall. So I just want to encourage you, if you failed, don't stay discouraged. Get back up, keep on improving, and you will experience success. I want you to share this video with all your friends, especially those who might have encountered failure recently. And I also want to hear from you in the comments below, your experience with failure and some of the things that helped you to overcome this failure and eventually experience success. Thank you for joining me on this 2-part journey, and I will see you in another episode of Journey to Tech with Courage.